Thank you for allowing us to present our research on the utility of follow-up cervical length screening in low-risk women with a cervical length 26 to 29 millimeters. Short mid-trimester cervical length has long been understood to be a risk factor for early preterm birth. Multiple trials have demonstrated that vaginal progesterone reduces the risk of early preterm birth and neonatal morbidity in those with short cervix less than or equal to 25 millimeters. With this effective therapy, screening for and treating short cervix has been demonstrated to reduce the rate of preterm birth at multiple institutions. Singletons with a cervical length 26 to 29 millimeters were at over twofold increased risk of preterm birth. However, there is no therapy or follow-up recommended for this subgroup. Additional transvaginal ultrasounds may impact the cost-effectiveness of screening protocols. In 2017, we began the following practice. All low-risk singletons were universally screened for short cervix with transvaginal ultrasound at the time of anatomy scan. Those with a cervical length less than or equal to 25 millimeters were recommended vaginal progesterone, and those with cervical length 26 to 29 millimeters were recommended to have a one-time follow-up cervical length measurement. Our objective was to evaluate the utility of repeat cervical length measurement in singletons without prior spontaneous preterm birth and an initial cervical length of 26 to 29 millimeters by reporting the rate of short cervix identified on follow-up. This was a 2-year retrospective cohort study at a single institution. Singletons presenting for anatomy ultrasound with initial cervical length of 26 to 29 millimeters were included, and those with a prior preterm birth, cerclage in situ, or major anomaly or aneuploidy were excluded. The primary outcome was to report the rate of short cervix less than or equal to 25 millimeter identified on follow-up cervical length measurement. Secondary outcomes included preterm birth rates and a basic cost-benefit estimate. Standard statistical tests were used. 2,800 singletons had an anatomy ultrasound with cervical length screening. 7% had a cervical length 26 to 29 millimeters. A total of 144 completed recommended follow-up, and of those, 21 or 15% were found to have a short cervix less than 25 millimeters on follow-up. A shorter initial cervical length was associated with the incidence of short cervix on follow-up ultrasound. Overall, the spontaneous preterm birth rate less than 37 weeks was 9% and less than 34 weeks was 3%. Those who went on to develop a short cervix had an early preterm birth rate less than 34 weeks of 11%. Despite the trend of increased preterm birth rate in those who developed a short cervix, this did not reach statistical significance. All those identified to have a short cervix were recommended vaginal progesterone therapy. Compared to a historical cohort of low-risk singletons with cervical length over 25 millimeters, those with an initial cervical length of 26 to 29 millimeters, as well as those who subsequently developed short cervix, had a significantly higher rate of spontaneous preterm birth. Based on our cohort, we estimated a 15% incidence of short cervix identified on follow-up ultrasound, and of those, 11% would have an early preterm birth even with vaginal progesterone therapy. Based on a meta-analysis by Romero et al., given a relative risk of 0.65 with vaginal progesterone therapy, there would be a 17% rate of early preterm birth if short cervix had not been identified and treated. Costs were estimated based on a cost-effective analysis by Werner et al. 111 repeat transvaginal ultrasounds would have to be performed to prevent a single early preterm birth. The cost of 111 additional transvaginal cervical length ultrasounds is approximately 1/4 the neonatal and early pediatric cost of a single early preterm birth. This is the first formal evaluation of a protocol for repeat cervical length screening in low-risk singletons. 15% of otherwise low-risk singletons with a cervical length of 26 to 29 millimeters will develop a short cervix on follow-up cervical length measurement prior to 24 weeks. Singletons with an initial mid-trimester cervical length of 26 to 29 millimeters are at increased risk of spontaneous preterm birth. 111 additional transvaginal ultrasounds would be needed to prevent a single early preterm birth less than 34 weeks through detection and treatment of short cervix. In conclusion, repeat cervical length measurement in singletons with initial cervical length 26 to 29 millimeters identifies a high-risk subgroup who will develop short cervix, are at risk for early preterm birth, and would benefit from vaginal progesterone therapy. This is a potentially cost-effective protocol for preterm birth prevention. I would like to thank the Pharma Foundation for a Faculty Development Award, as well as the Division of Maternal Fetal Medicine and Thomas Jefferson University for supporting this study.